I came home from a 12-hour shift at the clinic to find Sana Masood asleep in my bed, wearing my university hoodie, her shoes still on, and a key I'd never given her on the nightstand, and the first thing she said, without opening her eyes, was an address. 47 Bund Road, Unit 9. The gray locker on the left. Then she rolled over and pulled my blanket to her chin and went still, and I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom holding a bag of takeaway biryani that was getting cold and thought, she's been gone for 7 months. She left without a word. Her father told me if I came near her again, he'd have me arrested. And now she's in my bed, reciting a storage unit address in her sleep, like it's a prayer she's been repeating so long her unconscious has memorized it. I set down the biryani. I didn't wake her. Instead, I sat in the kitchen and stared at the key on the nightstand from across the apartment and tried to decide whether the woman I'd spent 7 months trying to forget had come back because she missed me or because she needed something, and whether I could survive it either way. It was both. It's always both. I just didn't know yet what was in the gray locker on the left. I need to go back 11 months, because this story starts before she disappeared, and if I don't tell you why she left, you'll misread why she came back. Sana and I met at the Government College University Library in Lahore during final year. She was studying architecture. I was studying medicine. We had no overlapping courses, no mutual friends, no reason to exist in each other's lives except that the library's only functional printer was on the 3rd floor, and we both needed it at the same time on the same Tuesday in October, and the queue was long enough that we talked, and the talking was good enough that we forgot we were waiting. She was the daughter of Javed Masood, who owned Masood & Sons Construction, one of the largest residential contractors in Punjab. They built apartment complexes, shopping plazas, housing societies. Javed Masood's face was on billboards along GT Road, always smiling, always standing in front of a building with his arms crossed like a man who'd conquered something. Sana didn't talk about him much. When she did, her sentences had the careful architecture of someone constructing a wall, each word load bearing, each gap deliberate. He builds things, she said once, early on. That's what he does. He builds things, and he's very good at it, and everything else about him is complicated. I didn't push. I was in love. And in love you accept the walls because you think eventually the person will take them down. They don't. They just build doors in them and decide whether to let you through. We were together for 4 months. The kind of together where you haven't defined it, but your toothbrush is at their apartment, and their books are stacked on your desk, and everyone who sees you together says finally like you'd been late to something, only they could see. She stayed at my place most weekends. I met her mother once, briefly, at a university function. A small, precise woman who looked at me the way you look at a forecast that might or might not ruin your plans. I never met Javed. Sana made sure of that. Then I ruined everything. Or I did the right thing. 7 months later, standing in my kitchen while she slept in my bed, I still didn't know which. Sana was working on her final year thesis, a structural analysis of residential buildings in Lahore's newer housing societies. She needed case studies. Her father's company was the obvious source, so she requested project files from Masood & Sons' office. What she got was a USB drive left on her desk by a site engineer named Bilal, who'd been with the company for 12 years and who, according to Sana, looked like he hadn't slept in a week when he handed it to her. He said, "Use this for your thesis, and then look at the load-bearing specs on the Model Town project." And then he left. She looked at the load-bearing specs. They didn't match the building permits. The permits specified 12-inch reinforced columns on a 9-story residential building, The as-built specs, the ones showing what was actually constructed, showed 8-inch columns with reduced rebar. The difference was structural. 12-inch columns hold a 9-story building safely. 8-inch columns hold it until they don't. How many people live in that building? I asked. 214 families. She showed me the files on a Saturday night in my apartment, sitting cross-legged on my bed, the same bed she'd be asleep in 7 months later, and I watched her face as she walked me through the structural calculations, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for herself, for 214 families living in a building her father's company had built with columns that were 4 inches too thin. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know." "What did Bilal want you to do?" "Bilal wanted me to know. I don't think he planned beyond that." We sat with the files open between us for an hour, and the silence had the weight of a thing that was about to divide our lives into before and after, and I said the sentence that I've replayed in my head every day since. "Sana, if that building fails, people die. We have to report this." She looked at me. "We? You showed me. That makes me responsible too. If we report it, my father loses the company. My mother loses her home. My brother loses his university fees. Everything they have, the house in Da, the cars, my brother's tuition at Lums, all of it is built on the company. The company's the floor. If the floor goes, everyone falls. And if we don't, 214 families are living in a building that could collapse. I know that. Children live in that building, Sana. I saw the permits. 9 floors, family-sized units. There are children sleeping in bedrooms held up by columns that are 4 inches thinner than the engineering says they need to be. I know that too. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. You think I haven't done the math? You think I haven't lain awake calculating the difference between my father's freedom and a structural failure during monsoon season, when the ground is saturated and the load shifts, and those 8-inch columns? She stopped. Her face did something I hadn't seen before. A kind of controlled demolition. Everything held in place by will alone. I know what the building needs. I'm an architecture student. I can read a load-bearing specification. I know exactly what those columns can hold and exactly what they can't. And I know that my father knows too, because the cost-saving analysis is in his own files. I'm not asking you to help me ignore it. I'm asking you to understand that knowing the right thing and being able to do the right thing are not the same experience. The sentence sat between us like a knife on a table, handled toward neither of us. She closed the laptop. I need to think. She left my apartment that night, and I didn't hear from her for 3 days. The longest 3 days up to that point. I went to the clinic. I saw patients. I ate meals I didn't taste. And every night I looked at the structural diagrams she'd left on my desk and counted the floors and tried to multiply the number of families by the probability of failure, and couldn't. Because probability is a mathematical concept, and these were beds and kitchens and children's rooms stacked 9 stories high on columns that were built to save money and nothing else. When she came back, she stood in my doorway, not sitting, not staying, and said, "I can't do it. I understand why you think we should. But I can't be the person who destroys my own family." "Then I'll do it," I said. "I'll file the report. Your name won't be on it. It doesn't matter whose name is on it. He'll know it came from me. I'm the only one who had access to those files. Bilal had access. Bilal is gone. He resigned the day after he gave me the drive. He's in Karachi. He won't answer my calls." She paused. "If you do this, we're done. Not because I want us to be, because my father will make sure of it. I looked at her in my doorway, the woman whose toothbrush was in my bathroom, and whose architecture textbooks were on my desk, and whose breath I could time in my sleep, and I made the choice that every person in this situation makes. The one that feels like the right thing, and the brave thing, and also the thing that detonates the only relationship you've ever had that felt like home. Sana, don't say it gently. If you're going to blow up my life, don't be gentle about it. I'm going to file the report. She nodded. Once, the nod of someone who already knew and had come back to hear it, said out loud, because some things have to be spoken before they become real. Then this is the last time I'm here, she said. She stepped forward, into the apartment, not out of it, and kissed me, and the kiss was the taste of an ending that both of us had chosen and neither of us wanted, and then she picked up her architecture textbooks from my desk, one by one, and walked out without looking back. The toothbrush stayed. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It's still there. I filed the report the next morning. I sent the USB drive to the Punjab Building Control Authority with a letter explaining the discrepancy between the permitted and as-built specifications on the Model Town project. I did not use Sana's name. I did not identify Bilal. I presented the evidence as an anonymous tip from a concerned party with access to project documentation. It wasn't anonymous for long. The PB Kia opened an investigation within 2 weeks. Masood and Sons was notified. A structural audit of the Model Town building was ordered. And Javed Masood, a man who'd built an empire on the difference between what the permits said and what the columns actually held, began the systematic process of identifying who had betrayed him. He found out in 4 days, not because I'd been careless, but because the USB drive had metadata, file access logs showing it had been opened on Sana's university account. The trail led from the drive to her laptop to the fact that she'd been spending weekends at the apartment of a medical student named Haroon Tariq. From there, the math was simple. Sana called me on a Wednesday. Her voice was the voice of a person standing inside a building that's already falling. He knows. How much? Everything. The drive, the report, you. He took my phone. This is Omni's. He's locked my accounts. I can't access my university portal, my bank, my email. He's pulled me out of university pending a family matter. His lawyer is drafting something, I don't know what. He told me if I contact you again, he'll file a harassment complaint against you and have your medical residency application flagged. He can't do that. He can. He has a lawyer whose entire job is making people's problems go away, and right now, you're the problem. She was breathing fast. I have to go. I don't know when I can call again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. Sana, the line went dead. I didn't hear from her for 7 months. I want to compress these months, because they're not where the story lives. But you need to know what happened in them to understand what was waiting in the gray locker. The PBSA investigation proceeded slowly. Pakistan's building regulatory system moves at the speed of the people who fund it, and Javed Masood funded a lot of people. The structural audit confirmed the column discrepancy. 8-inch columns where 12-inch were specified across 3 floors. The building was classified as structurally compromised. Residents were notified. Some moved out. Most couldn't afford to. They stayed in a building that might fall, because the alternative was the street, and the street is more certain than a structural engineer's report. Javed's lawyer filed a counter-report arguing that the 8-inch columns met alternative performance-based design criteria, a technical argument that essentially said the building was safe because it hadn't fallen yet. The PBCA investigator told me, off the record, that the counter-report was creative fiction, but that the case would stall unless additional documentation surfaced, specifically internal company communications showing that Massoudin's sons had knowingly deviated from permitted specifications. The USB drive showed the discrepancy. What was needed was intent. Meanwhile, Javid made his moves. They were precise, institutional, and deniable, the kind of moves a man makes when he spent 30 years learning that power isn't about force, it's about friction. About making someone's life slightly harder in 12 different places until the cumulative weight becomes unbearable. My medical residency application to Mayo Hospital was delayed, not denied, just delayed, stuck in a loop of additional verification required that no one could explain and no one would resolve. I called the admissions office weekly. A different person answered each time. Each person was polite. Each person told me the file was under review. After 6 weeks, I went in person and sat in a waiting room for 4 hours, and the administrator who finally saw me looked at her screen, frowned, and said, "There's a flag on your file. I can't tell you who placed it or why. You'll need to submit a written request for clarification." I submitted 3 written requests. None were answered. My landlord received a letter from a law firm. Not a lawsuit, just a letter. The legal equivalent of a hand placed on someone's shoulder, suggesting that my lease might violate an obscure building code provision related to occupancy density in converted residential structures. The provision didn't apply to my building. But the letter existed. And the landlord, a nervous man who ran 3 rental properties and couldn't afford a lawyer, started calling me weekly to ask whether I was in any kind of trouble. My mother, in Multan, received a phone call from a man who identified himself as a family friend and suggested that her son was involved in a legal matter that could affect the family's reputation. She called me in tears. I told her it was a misunderstanding. She asked me 3 times whether I'd done something wrong, and each time the question carried less doubt and more certainty, because mothers hear the things you don't say as loudly as the things you do. Javid didn't need to threaten me directly. He just needed to touch every surface of my life with enough pressure that I'd feel it everywhere. Like humidity. Present in every room. Impossible to locate, impossible to escape. And Sana, I heard nothing. No calls, no messages, no word through mutual friends. Her university account was deactivated. Her social media was deleted. Her phone number was disconnected. She was erased from every system I knew how to search, and I searched them all. University directories, professional registries, even the alumni association for her secondary school. Nothing. She had been removed from the digital world as cleanly as a file dragged to a recycle bin. I told myself she'd chosen her family. I told myself she was safe. I told myself the things you tell yourself when the alternative, that someone you love is trapped inside a house that has become a prison, monitored by a father who builds walls for a living and knows exactly how to make them hold, is a thought you can't carry for 7 months without it breaking something structural inside you. I carried it anyway. It broke me anyway. But the toothbrush stayed in the bathroom glass, and I never moved her architecture textbooks off my desk, because leaving them there was the only way I could say to no one and to myself, I still expect her to come back for them. And then she was in my bed. I stood in the kitchen and looked at her through the doorway. The shoes still on, the hoodie she'd taken from my closet with the key she shouldn't have had, the way her body was curled like a parenthesis around something invisible, and I cataloged the changes. She was thinner. Not healthy thin, the thin that comes from not eating on a schedule. Her hair was shorter, cut roughly, not styled. Her hands, resting on my pillow, had the cracked knuckles of someone who'd been washing them too often. A stress response I recognized from clinic patients with anxiety disorders. I let her sleep For 2 hours, I ate the biryani cold at the kitchen table and looked at the key on the nightstand and looked up the address she'd said in her sleep, 47 Bund Road, on my phone. It was a commercial storage facility. 24-hour access. Pay-by-month lockers. At midnight, she woke up. I heard it, not movement, but the change in her breathing, the shift from unconscious rhythm to the held breath of someone who's just remembered where they are and isn't sure yet whether it's safe. "It's me," I said from the kitchen. "You're in my apartment. You're safe." She appeared in the kitchen doorway. My hoodie hung past her thighs. Her eyes were swollen from sleep and something older than sleep. "Haroon Sana. I broke in. Your bathroom window. The lock is the same as it was. I know. I should fix it. Don't." She almost smiled. "Not yet." She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd looked at the USB drive a lifetime ago, and I made chai, because making chai is the only thing I know how to do when the person I love is sitting in my kitchen, looking like she's been living in a war, and I don't know which questions will help and which will detonate. "Your father," I said. "Arrested 3 days ago. The PBSA finally got an arrest warrant. Fraud, criminal negligence, endangerment. He's out on bail, but his passport's been seized, and the company accounts are frozen." "Where's your mother?" "With my aunt in Islamabad. She's not speaking to me." "Where have you been?" She wrapped both hands around the chai cup. "For the first 5 months, at home." He kept me there. Not locked in, he's not that crude. Just managed, no phone, no internet. A driver who reported my movements. University deferred. Friends told I was dealing with a family health issue. I was a hostage dressed as a daughter. She drank. 2 months ago I left. I waited until he was in Islamabad for a court hearing, packed a bag, walked out the front door, and got in my car. I've been staying with a friend in Johar town. Then the friend's husband said he didn't want trouble with Javed Masood, and I was asked to leave. I slept in my car for 3 nights. 3 nights. In the parking lot of the storage facility on Bund Road. She looked at me. "I need to tell you about the locker." The chai went cold. I didn't notice. "Bilal," she said, "the site engineer. He didn't just give me a USB drive and disappear. He copied everything. Every internal email, every project modification order, every communication between my father and the site foreman about reducing column dimensions. He put it in a storage locker before he left for Karachi. He paid for 3 years in advance, and he sent me the key." "When?" 6 months ago. By registered mail to a P.O. box I'd set up before my father took my phone. Bilal's letter said, "The drive you have shows the discrepancy. The locker has the intent. Your father's emails to the foreman. Direct instructions to deviate from the engineering specs. He wrote the words himself, use 8-inch. No one checks." That sentence is in an email dated 14 months before the building was occupied. No one checks. 214 families. She set down the cup. "The PBSA investigator told you the case would stall without evidence of intent. The locker has the intent." "But I couldn't go to the investigator. My father was monitoring everything, and if he found out about the locker before the documents were in official custody, he'd destroy them. He's already destroyed the company's servers. He wiped them the week before his arrest. The locker is the only copy." "So you came here?" "I came here because you're the only person who already knows the truth. You're the only person my father can't pressure, because he's already done everything he can to you and you're still standing. And I came here because..." She stopped. pressed her hands flat on the table. Because I've been sleeping in a car for 3 days repeating the locker address out loud so I wouldn't forget it, and the only place I could think of where I'd be able to stop repeating it, where I could finally sleep without guarding the words, was here. You said it in your sleep. The address: 47 Bund Road, Unit 9, the gray locker on the left. I know, I've said it so many times it's become automatic. Like breathing. I looked at her across the table. The cracked knuckles, the rough-cut hair, the hoodie she'd stolen from my closet because she had nothing else. And I felt the 7 months collapse into the space between us. All the silence and the distance and the residency delays and the phone calls to my mother. And underneath all of it, running like a wire through the whole structure, the reason she'd left and the reason she'd come back, which were the same reason. 214 families in a building with columns that were 4 inches too thin. We go to the locker tonight, I said. We photograph everything. We take the originals directly to the PBCI investigator's office at first light. Not to a lawyer, not to the police, not to anyone Javed can reach. Directly to the investigator. Tonight is 3 a.m. The facility is 24 hours. You said so. I said I slept in their parking lot. I know their hours. She smiled. A real smile, the first one, cracked and exhausted and completely without strategy. And the words I'd waited 7 months to hear weren't the address. They were the things she said next. I missed you. I missed you every single day. And I'm sorry I left. And I'm sorry I came back. And I need you to know that both of those are the same apology. I crossed the kitchen. I put my hand on the back of her chair. I didn't touch her, not yet. Not until she decided the distance was hers to close, and I said, "You don't owe me an apology. You owe me a drive to Bund Road." She laughed. It sounded like a door unlocking after 7 months of rust. The storage facility was a concrete block with fluorescent lighting and a guard who was asleep behind a desk fan. Sana's key opened the outer gate. The locker, Unit 9, gray, on the left, exactly as she'd recited in her sleep, opened with a second key on the same ring. Inside, 2 archive boxes. Heavy. The kind law firms use. We sat on the concrete floor of the storage corridor at 3:20 in the morning, surrounded by fluorescent light and the hum of ventilation, and opened them. The first box contained printed emails. Hundreds of them, chronologically organized, spanning 18 months. Bilal had been thorough. He'd printed every email between Javed Massoud and the site foreman on the Model Town project, and he'd highlighted the critical ones in yellow, not randomly, but with a legend he'd written on the inside of the box lid. Yellow for direct instructions, orange for cost references, pink for any mention of inspections or compliance. He'd organized his own firing. He'd built the case file before he ran. The email Sana had quoted, "Use 8-inch. No one checks," was on page 34. It was sent from Javed's company email at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which meant he'd written it at home, at night, deliberately, not in the rush of a site meeting. The full email was 3 lines. Model Town Phase 2, floors 4-9. Use 8-inch columns per revised spec. No need for structural research. No one checks the as-builts against the permits after occupancy. Save the difference and apply to the Goldberg site. No one checks. He'd written it like a fact of life, like weather, like gravity. But it wasn't the worst one. The worst one was dated 6 months later, after the building was occupied, after 214 families had moved in and hung curtains and unpacked kitchens and put children to bed in rooms held up by columns that existed, because a man had written "no one checks" at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A site engineer, not Bilal. A different one, named Kashif, had emailed Javed flagging visible cracking on the third-floor columns, northeast corner, and recommending immediate structural assessment before monsoon loading. Javed's reply, in full, cosmetic. Plaster over it. Don't put this in writing again. Don't put this in writing again. The irony was so precise it felt authored. A man who'd built his fortune on the gap between what's written and what's built. Undone by his own instruction to stop writing things down, written down. The second box contained the engineering firm's original structural specifications, signed and stamped, legally binding, the approved building permits with the 12-inch column requirement in bold, and the cost-saving analysis that Javed's finance team had prepared. The analysis was a single-page spreadsheet showing that switching from 12-inch to 8-inch columns would save 11 lakh per floor across 9 floors. Total savings, 99 lakh, roughly 1 crore. At the bottom, in Javed's handwriting, a note, approved. Proceed, JM, his initials. His handwriting. His decision. Sana held the cost-saving document and her hands were shaking. Not from cold, from the specific tremor of a person holding proof that her father valued 1 crore more than 214 families, and that he'd initialed that valuation in his own hand, like a man signing a receipt for something he'd purchased. He knew, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't just cut corners. He calculated the savings. He made a spreadsheet. He initialed it. Sana. He initialed it. She set the document down carefully, precisely, the way she did everything, and then she pressed both hands over her face and breathed. And the breathing was the sound of a person's last illusion about their father leaving their body. I put my hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it. We sat on the floor of a storage corridor at 3 a.m, surrounded by the paper evidence of a crime that had been waiting in a gray locker for a year and a half, guarded by a sleeping security guard and a woman who'd memorized the address so deeply it played in her unconscious like a heartbeat. We need to photograph everything, I said. Every page before we move the originals. It took 90 minutes. My phone storage filled up. I used hers. We photographed 612 pages, and when we were done, we put the originals back in the boxes, carried them to my car, and drove to the PBCA investigator's office on Davis Road. We arrived at 5:15 a.m. The office opened at 9. We sat in the car and waited. Sana fell asleep with her head against my shoulder, and this time she didn't say the address. She didn't say anything. She just slept. Deeply, silently, the way a person sleeps when they've finally put down the thing they've been carrying. The PBCA investigator, a woman named Bushra Riaz, who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in sentences that could have been cross-examination questions, took custody of the boxes at 9:07 a.m. She opened the first box. Read the "No one checks" email, set it down, removed her glasses, and said, "How long has this been in a storage locker?" 18 months, Sana said. 18 months. She put her glasses back on. I've been trying to build this case for 8 months with 1 USB drive and a structural audit. This is everything. She looked at both of us. You understand that this changes the case from regulatory violation to criminal fraud, with documented knowledge of structural risk. I'll be referring this to the FIA. And I need both of you to understand that once I do, there's no taking it back. His lawyer will come for you. Both of you. His lawyer has been coming for me since I filed the original report, I said, and I've been waiting 18 months to sit in this chair, Sana said. I'm not leaving it. Bushra nodded. She began documenting the contents. Javed Masood was rearrested the following week. The new charges included criminal fraud, falsification of building permits, and based on the email about plastering over cracked columns, criminal endangerment with knowledge of ongoing risk. His bail was revoked. The building on Model Town was evacuated by order of the district commissioner. Structural remediation was ordered, a process that would take 18 months and cost more than the building was worth, a cost that would now be borne by the Massoud estate. Sana testified. It was the hardest thing I've ever watched another person do. She sat in a witness box and answered questions about her father's business practices. And Javit's lawyer, the same lawyer who delayed my residency and sent letters to my landlord, tried to discredit her by citing her personal relationship with the original complainant as evidence of bias. Advocate Bushra, who'd left the PBCA to prosecute the case personally because the case had become the kind that defines a career, asked one question in redirect, Miss Massoud. Did your personal relationship with the complainant cause your father to use 8-inch columns instead of 12? The courtroom was silent. Sana said, No. Did your personal relationship cause your father to email his engineer instructing him to plaster over structural cracks? No. Then what, in your expert architectural opinion, caused those decisions? 99 lakh. Sana paused. 1 crore, if you round up. That's what he saved. That's what 214 families were worth to him. The gallery murmured. The judge didn't silence it. The conviction took 11 months. Javed Massoud was found guilty on all counts. The sentencing is pending. Sana finished her architecture degree. She re-enrolled after the arrest, completed her thesis on structural failures in Pakistani residential construction, and graduated with a distinction the department hadn't awarded in 4 years. Her thesis used her father's building as a case study. When the external examiner asked whether she had a conflict of interest, she said, I have the opposite of a conflict of interest. I have a reason to make sure this never happens again. She didn't move back into my apartment after that first night. We didn't fall back together the way stories suggest, neatly, completely, as if 7 months could be erased by a drive to Bund Road and a morning at the PBCA. The 7 months had happened. The silence had happened. The car, the parking lot, the 3 nights sleeping upright with an address playing in her head like a tape loop. Those had happened, and they'd changed her in ways that I was still learning to read. But she came back. Not to my bed, to my kitchen table, first. Then to the chai that I made too sweet and she drank anyway. Then to the window she'd broken through, which I still hadn't fixed, because fixing it felt like closing something I wanted to leave open. One evening, 3 months after the trial, she was sitting at my desk reading a structural engineering journal, and I was sitting on the bed pretending to study, and she said, without looking up, the words you waited to hear. What? That first night, you said I said the address in my sleep. But that's not what you'd been waiting for. The address was an accident. You'd been waiting for the other thing. Which other thing? She looked up. I missed you every single day. Yes, that one. Was it enough? You showed up in my bed after sleeping in a car for 3 days, because you trusted me more than anyone else in your life. You carried a key to a locker that could put your own father in prison, and you brought it here. To me. I set down the textbook. You didn't need to say you missed me. You drove it across the city at 3 a.m. Her eyes went bright. She closed the journal. She crossed the room. And when she reached me, she didn't kiss me. She put her hand on my chest, over my heartbeat, and held it there. And the touch said everything the 7 months had made too heavy for language. I should fix the window, I said. Not yet, she said. It was the second time she'd said it. Both times it meant the same thing. Leave the way in open. I might need it again. She showed up asleep. She said an address I didn't understand. She was wearing my hoodie, and her shoes were still on, and she'd been living in her car because the world she'd been born into had become a place she couldn't stay. The words I'd waited 7 months to hear weren't a confession of love. They were a storage unit address, 47 Bund Road, Unit 9, the gray locker on the left. Because love, when it's real, doesn't announce itself. It shows up exhausted, at midnight, holding evidence, asking you to drive. Have you ever realized that the person who disappeared from your life without explanation, the one you spent months being angry at, mourning, trying to forget, was actually carrying something so heavy they had to leave you just to hold it, and they came back the moment they could finally set it down? And if you think about it honestly, if you picture their face right now, did you leave a window open for them? Or did you lock it and pretend you'd moved on? Tell me. Not the version where you saw it coming, the version where you didn't. If this one kept you past where you meant to stop reading, subscribe. The next story involves a key that doesn't open a locker. It opens a house, and the person who left it under the doormat has been gone for 2 years. But the milk in the fridge is fresh.